nothing that we share, nothing that we teach, and nothing that we train our couples and mentor them into that we haven't done ourselves and aren't currently doing. And we have several tools that we work with. Inside of that, we have a great communication tool that we call check-in that allows couples to share from their hearts. And this is something that is actually really cool, no matter if you're in a coupleship or not. And this information today too is whether you're in a relationship with a partner or other relationships. Some of these are really good conversations to have with the people that you love. And also these 5 important conversations to have in your coupleship to keep the fire blazing are also things that if you aren't in a relationship, you can have in your back pocket conversations to share when love does find you again, if you've decided that that's what you want to do in the future. And so Jamie and I work very diligently at our own work personally, and then in our coupleship, we have our own mentor, so that we're keeping on track, so that we are, discovering the things for ourselves. And it's the layers, people say the layers of the onion. Well, Jamie and I, what we say is the layers of the peony opening. A peony is this tight ball. And when it starts to bloom, and this is the perfect time of year for that here in Boise, Idaho, when it starts to bloom, the petals unfold slowly, and then eventually there's a spectacular bloom that comes from that. Peonies are my favorite flowers, so I love that analogy, that growth. I have 2 core values, and if you haven't discovered your 2 core values yet, and they do change with time, so if you haven't looked at that recently, that's something really powerful you can look at. But my 2 core values are growth and joy. And so every decision that I make in my own personal life, and then in my relationship with Jamie, and in my other relationships, is this if I filter this through joy and growth, is it in alignment? And so that's how I make decisions, is through that particular thing. And then also with the check-in tool that I was talking about earlier, checking in with yourself. And we have this cool feeling wheel that we use because a lot of people have a difficult time identifying their feelings. And this feeling wheel that we have allows people a way to look at that and to say, okay, what am I actually feeling? Because most of us don't learn how to communicate from our heart level. And so what we teach is how to communicate heart to heart. And this is just a variety of feelings that we have that you can reference to say, okay, how am I actually feeling right now? Good, fine, bad. Those are all descriptors. They're not actual emotion feelings. So emotion language. Emotion is the chemical that's happening inside of your body. And these feeling words are the words we put on what's happening inside our body, those emotions. And so this feeling wheel is a huge an important tool for connecting heart to heart with anybody, whether that's your partner, whether that is a workmate, or in your relationship with your friends, being able to say, instead of telling somebody a story, be able to say, hey, this happened yesterday and I feel frustrated, confused, and overwhelmed. And that's a really helpful way to share what's really going on with your heart. And I know that being vulnerable, if you're going to choose vulnerability, it needs to be with people that you feel safe with. So keep all those things in mind. Those are all really important things. So to get going here, the 5 important conversations to have with your partner so that you keep that fire blazing in the relationship. Conventional wisdom says that at about 3 years into a relationship, that passion, that deep passion, sometimes they say that it's earlier than that, but that deep passion and excitement that you have with your partner, that begins to fade and it turns into an endearing, long-lasting love. Yes, and why I say that is that that passion doesn't have to go away. Jamie and I have learned that oxytocin, the love and bonding chemical, is a really important chemical for keeping the connection and the presence with each other. And most of us were not born with oxytocin. Well, all of us, none of us were born with oxytocin receptors. When we're born, it's our mother holding us for those first 2 hours after we are born that we then get oxytocin receptors and build them during that period of time. And then that's kind of our foundational oxytocin receptors for being able to have that later throughout our lifetime. And like for myself and for Jamie, my husband, neither of us had that. Both of our moms were medicated and they took us away right away. That was very common. I'm 55 and that was very common for that time zone. So oxytocin, I tended to use cortisol and Jamie tended to use adrenaline. And when it comes to wanting to connect and bond, you need to be growing that oxytocin. And so being intentional about growing that oxytocin. And so that's something that we teach couples and something that you can do to grow the oxytocin, whether that's in your coupleship or if you're not in a coupleship, is a 20-second hug. Without intention. If you're in a coupleship, that means that it's just a hug. It's not going to go anywhere beyond that. 20 seconds. And I have to tell you, my kinesthesia, my touchy-feely part of me is much lower. I'm much more visual, but Jamie's high kinesthetic. So that hug, for a long time, I had to think, okay, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. It sounds silly, but it still created the oxytocin between us. So that's just a really fun tool to have in your toolbox to foster oxytocin growth. And adrenaline blocks oxytocin. So it's really important that if you are experiencing adrenaline in your relationship, it's going to block the oxytocin receptors that are there. So just keep that in mind. That's a very important piece to the experience of connection. So I am very excited about this topic because I want you to know that no matter what, you are able to not only become reconnected with your partner if you're not, it can reconnect, become more intimate emotionally, and become more intimate. That then leads to a deeper sexual connection. Those are all intertwined. And the 20-second hugs is just one piece of the puzzle for feeling more connected to yourself and to your partner. So what is the first conversation that is very important for you to be having in your relationship to keep the fire blazing? The first one is to communicate from your heart. Like I talked about, our communication tool, the check-in tool, is communicating from your heart. That is heart language. And you checking in with each other is such a powerful gift. And you can do that with your girlfriends. You can do this check-in with your girlfriends. You can do this check-in with the people that you feel safe with. If you don't have that, a relationship, a coupleship, or if you're not comfortable yet sharing something like this with your partner because you maybe have a disconnect in the relationship, test this out on your friends and people that you trust. So checking in with each other regularly on how you are feeling. What are the feeling words around what you are experiencing, and taking that time to support each other. And so, like I mentioned, Jamie and I do this regularly. We not only teach it to our couples, and so we're doing that with our new couples consistently every week. And then we will do check-in. Because it's such a powerful tool. And the tool is very simple. It is, you sit knee to knee, you have open body stance, nothing crossed, no eye rolling. That's the number one thing, no eye rolling. When your partner shares, one person shares, the other one is quiet. And then that person who's sharing says, I pass. And then the other person shares. And that sharing looks like, yesterday, when you were distant, I felt frustrated, confused, and lonely. It's as simple as that. Today, when we woke up to that text, I felt hurt, overwhelmed, and aware. And then a third one, so you'd share three things. The third one is yesterday when we were talking about going on a vacation with our kids and grandkids, I felt excited and connected and ready. That's simple. Say, I pass. And then your partner has the opportunity to do that. That's what check-in looks like. It's a much bigger thing than this, but that is how you speak from your heart. You're not telling a story. You are sharing what your heart is experiencing. When you start talking on that level, so many times we have had people say, wow, we've never talked like this before. I never even knew my partner had those feelings. It's a very powerful tool. So number one is communicate from the heart and do it often. Number two is talk about your relationship expectations. So what is that? It's important that you can have this continued discussion about expectations and how you feel respected and how you feel valued and how you feel loved, and also respecting your partner's feelings and experiences. Your partner's feelings are their feelings. You are not responsible for them. But because you care about them, you want to make sure that they know that you care about how they're feeling, even if you don't agree with how they're feeling, because it doesn't make sense to you. You're not them. If I were you, I'd feel exactly how you feel, because I would have your experiences. I would have your situations. I would be you. And so to say, if I were you, I'd feel differently, it's not even accurate, because if I were you, I'd feel exactly how you feel. And so allowing your partner their feelings and not taking them personally, that's not easy. I remember when we first learned this stuff in the early 2000s from our mentor, and I was mad. I was really, really on fire mad, and being a redhead and an Aries, you can see how that could be the case. I was super mad. I'm like, are you kidding me? He did this thing and that made me angry. No one can make you feel anything. You are responsible for the feelings that you are experiencing. Can someone do something that's hurtful? Absolutely. And you can feel hurt by it. Absolutely. But that does not mean that they made you feel, because that was the choice to stay in that feeling. It's kind of a weird concept, because you have that feeling within a millisecond. And so it does feel like this person made that happen to me. But I get to choose how I feel. And that's an important thing about when you're talking about your relationship expectations. For me, early on, I would rather be right than in relationship. And that did not suit me very well, because my rightness actually created disconnection and discontent in our relationship. And so being right is very overrated. The truth is, I may think sometimes I know that I'm right about this situation, but it's not worth it for me to create that tension and that conflict in our relationship. And we can have better conversations around it. I can talk about how I feel about it, but I don't necessarily have to prove that I'm right or make sure that Jamie knows that I'm right, or anybody around me. It's not worth that. And so being right, or having that rightness or righteousness, I'm always right, kills intimacy. So remember that if you're going to choose to be right, you are going to choose against relationship and intimacy. It's really not worth it, I promise you. So the third thing is that we want you, I want you, this is all coupleships, it's myself included, create your coupleship goals. What is it you want to see in your coupleship? Everybody here, I'm sure, has their own individual goals. Like, this is my goal for my emotional well-being. This is my goal for my physical well-being. This is my goal for my relationship well-being. This is my goal for my travel ideas, my financial well-being, my spiritual goals, and my well-being. Those are important goals to have individually. And they're also super important to have in your relationship. And so talking about your short-term and your long-term goals with each other with specific numbers with that, it can be very powerful for you. So because then you can print that baby up and you can post it somewhere in your room and you can look at those goals and objectives and see how you're doing with that. We recommend monthly. Look at those goals and say, okay, our goal of checking in up to 5 times a week, how are we doing on that? We're really doing well on that. Okay, do we want to make it 6 days a week? Or do we want to, pull it back a little bit, maybe 3 times a week? And so you can reassess the goals as you go. One of those goals, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but is sexuality. Are you having the conversation about sex, sexual intimacy? Are you having that conversation? A lot of couples don't, because it's a very difficult conversation. It can be very painful and very triggering. And so with Jamie and I, for a lot of years, we didn't really talk about it or talk about it well. One of us would feel triggered in the conversation. Jamie saying, "Oh, I would like more sex," and me saying, "Well, I'm doing my best that I can," and whatever that conversation looked like, and both coming out of it feeling very frustrated. So when we have a coupleship goal, that is relationship/sexual. So that's the emotional sexual connection, because it's all symbiotic. When the emotional cup is filled, the sexual cup is filled. That's the ideal thing, that it's the circular symbiotic thing. And you're both feeling fulfilled and connected in that area. So a good sexual goal can be, we want to have sex up to, or sexual intimacy, which doesn't necessarily end in sex. We want to have that up to 7 times a month, or whatever that looks like for you. It's an important conversation. The sex conversation is an important conversation, more about that. But the goal conversation is so powerful, because if you don't really have goals in place, there are things that happen in life, like maybe a lot of you have experienced, your kids are all out of the home, and so the empty nesting, and what do you do? And we're not connected. We haven't been connected because we've been so busy with the kids. How do you keep that connection, and how do you regain that connection? So having the conversation about, what are our goals? What are our adventure goals? What are our goals for travel? Where do we want to go? Write down all the bucket list things that you want, and figure out how to integrate that stuff into your goals as a couple, not your individual goals, but as a couple. And then the fourth thing is, establish your core values. I talked about that earlier. What are your core values? I mentioned that mine are growth and joy. And Jamie's happened to be, our crossover goal is joy. His are joy and honesty. And so for both of us, we want our relationship to be filled and protected by our values, and making sure we're filtering everything through our values before we say yes or before we say no to something. Anything that we decide to do as a couple, we want to make sure that it's filtered through our values, our couple values. So that makes it pretty easy, since we both have joy, and then I have growth, and Jamie has honesty. Is it symbiotic and connected to those goals? If it is, then let's do it. If it's not, let's reassess why we want to do it, and is this really important to us, and have a better conversation around that. Usually, if it doesn't go with your core values, it's something that you will decide that it's probably not worth doing. And so discuss with your partner your top 2 values. And if you're curious about what those might be, I have a PDF document that I can share with you. So if you would like to, you can message me or reach out to me, however you would like, and I can give you that PDF. The PDF is going to help you identify what are your top 2 goals. And all it is, it's a list of goals, a very broad list of goals that you can look at and decide which of these are my top 2 values. And values change. And I mentioned that values can change. They don't always change. My values used to be, so I've had growth and joy for a year and a half now. Before that time, my values were joy. So I had that one was the same. And my other one was loyalty. And I got to thinking about loyalty. I am loyal probably to a fault at times. In fact, I know I have been. I've grown in that area too. But being loyal to a fault, I thought, well, you know what? That's really a characteristic. That's something so important to me. That's probably not anything I'm gonna, if it's gonna go against being loyal to what's important to me, to my husband, to my children, to my core beliefs, to all of those things. If it's not going to add, if it's something that I am integrally, then I probably can choose another goal because that's just going to be a natural response for me. So then it was growth. What's funny about growth is that when I was a kid, like my whole life, my mom would say, if something was tough, she would say, well, it's a growing experience. And I remember saying a few times, I don't want to grow anymore. But the reality is, if I stop growing, then I lose. Actually, if I stop growing, I probably will become resentful and bitter, because I have to continue growing. Otherwise, I'm not being true to myself. I'm a different person today than I was a year ago. And so are you. And so it's valuing and honoring the person that you are today and seeing the growth that you've had in the last year. And what values have you held on to? What values have been very important to you? And how have you grown because of those values? And then being completely, instead of being tied to the person or loyal even to the person you were in the past, person you were last year, be loyal to the person you're going to be in a year, because growing is important. Changing is okay. It's not always easy. Some personalities love change, and I happen to be a creator, and some of you are aware of the test, the ideal personality that my husband and I created, and then Krista joined us in that a few years ago. I'm a creator, and so for me, I love change most of the time. Some changes I don't like so much, but I love change. But a sequencer, someone who's very detail oriented and likes the checks in the boxes, likes things the same, that person is not going to love or value change. So being aware of that is really important when you're looking at your core values as well. You're not going to choose change if you're a sequencer, but you might choose something like that if you like adventure, if you're a creator. And so personality has a tie to the core values as well. And so understand that your core values, my core values and Jamie's core values, they go together very, very well. Sometimes it can feel like there is, if you're not filtering things through those core values, that there's more tension in the relationship. So it's looking at the core values, even when it comes to having disagreements and tensions in the relationship. Look at your core values. What do you desire? What do you honor? And if it's like mine, where you're doing joy and growth, how can I grow in this? What is it that I need to learn? What's the kernel of truth here that I need to learn that will help me to hear Jamie and understand him, and so that he actually feels heard and understood, even if I don't agree 100%, even if I don't agree at all, that's okay. It's okay to agree to disagree. Some things that's very difficult in a relationship, other things it's not as important. So you have to decide again what core values you have and filter those things through those core values so that you know exactly, hey, this is a good direction to go. This right here is not so good. This tension we're having, we're going to need to maybe seek outside help so that we can make better decisions and have better communication and connection around this topic. Sometimes it does take an outside perspective to push through things that seemed like they would be no-brainers. When Jamie and I have had our hardest tensions or arguments, usually there's something over something completely ridiculous. That's important though. We're having ridiculous arguments or tensions because there's something important underneath that. And our values help us to identify maybe what our shadow values are that we're bringing in to the situation. A shadow value is something like, if I value growth and joy, a shadow value is something that is taking me away from growth and joy and keeping me in the dark about where that path is and how do I get back on that path. Sometimes it takes an outside perspective, an outside person to view that and give their feedback and direction on where I need to be headed, or we need to be headed. And that's what our mentor is for. And we don't meet with our mentor all the time, but we do meet with our mentor consistently. And if it's been a year, we reconnect with our mentor because we want to keep up on our connection to ourselves and to each other. So that's a part of the core value system, is that joy and that growth for me, is that I want to make sure that I'm continuing to grow and not staying stagnant. It's so easy to stay in that stagnant place and to continue to have the same conversation over and over again, expecting different results, but you're not having any path forward to get out of those old results that you've been getting or that I've been getting. And so needing someone to talk to that actually has been on that path, is on that path and ahead of me, so that I can get a different and better perspective. Someone who can call me out on my bullshit, for lack of a better way to say that. That's important because I'm so very tied to my own story and my own narrative that I need to figure out how to shift my narrative and live into the new narrative that's being created, because new narratives are always being created around us. We have to choose how we're going to fit into those narratives and how we want to shift our narrative. And core values are very important to that entire conversation with yourself, and then with your partner if you have one. And if you don't have a partner, your values, your core values, and sharing those with a trusted friend and saying, hey, I'm really struggling with this over here. These are my core values. What are your thoughts? And if it's a trusted friend, they're going to give you their honest feedback. If that is still stymies you, then reach out to someone to have a better conversation, a mentor, a coach, a consultant, whatever area of life you are struggling in. That can be a very powerful thing to do. And the fifth one is about sex. Talk about sex. Like I said earlier, this is a really, really difficult conversation. I know, I've been there, and a lot, off and on, right, throughout our relationship, because again, we have been growing. We are different people. Jamie's a different person today than he was a year ago. Same with me. And so continuing to have this conversation is really important, and it's hard, but that sexual emotional loop is so important. It's like the itsy bitsy spider. When the sexual is filled, when the emotional is filled, the sexual is filled, the emotional, the sexual. And so that dynamic is really important, and that nothing gets in the way of that. Talking about sex, where is this in your priorities in the relationship? This is such an important part of a relationship. If you are struggling in this area in your relationship, what is this looking like for you? Are there hormonal issues going on? I have to tell you, even though, because Jamie and I work so hard on the emotional part of this, the sexual part has grown and grown and grown. And it keeps on growing. It's that passion that keeps on growing because we're working on the oxytocin. And so we went to our doctor for our hormone stuff about a year ago now. And she said to me, she said, your numbers are some of the lowest I've seen. I can't believe you're having any kind of positive results sexually, intimately. And that's why I know that it's a lot between here. It's got what's going on in my head more than it's going on in my body, because obviously I was able to change what was going on in my body to be connected intimately, sexually intimately with my husband. And that's also working very hard on that oxytocin piece. I think that mattered a lot. Getting my hormones balanced and him getting his hormones balanced changed everything. And at my age and the age of this group, generally we're in our 40s and 50s and 60s, right? So if I would have done this in my 40s, I think it would have even been even more transformational. And I wish that I would have, but I didn't really. I mean, doctors would say, well, you're a little low here, or you're a little whatever, but it was never the conversation that I had last year with my new doctor. And she's phenomenal. If anybody would like her name, I can shoot that to you, but she's just fantastic practitioner. And in this area particularly, she is an expert and she's dynamic. So it's somebody that I highly recommend. And let me know if you would like her information. So talking about sex is really hard. Even Jamie and I, who've been doing this work for over 28 years, we didn't really start having a better conversation about sex. Kind of started probably about 10 years ago, a better conversation. We talked about it along the way, but about 10 years ago, starting that harder conversation. And then I would say really in the last 4 years, has it gotten to the place where I don't feel any weird feelings around it. I don't feel anxious. I don't feel maybe ashamed. I don't feel, and that's also, I don't feel bad about my body. I mean, the lights on or whatever, but I've worked really hard on that area. And I have found that I am in a space where I feel very valued and worthy and loving of myself. And that piece right there, when you talk about sex, just loving yourself makes a huge difference. Finding value and worth in yourself outside of any of your relationships or anything you do with work or anything else, so important. And so this conversation about sex, we totally sucked at it for so long. And now I can tell you that we could bring anything to our partner and we would be able to talk about it, even if it was uncomfortable. And most people have this, but what Jamie and I had was we had a lot of shame around sex in our lifetime. And so I was sexually abused when I was 5, and I had a lot of shame around that. And Jamie had some sexual abuse also when he was around 12. And so sex was a really shameful thing. And growing up in a very conservative religious environment, that also added to the shame around the sex conversation. And it's this whole dynamic of, for women, that you're supposed to wait to have sex. And so you're supposed to be, very, very, careful about how you dress and how you are and not this sexual being. And then when you get married, then you have to become this massive sexual being, this person who's all about it. And so what a crazy dynamic, because you're not supposed to, and you're not even supposed to talk about it or explore anything about yourself. And then you get into a relationship and you're supposed to know all about it. That was my experience. And that was Jamie's experience. And so here we come into this relationship. I mean, he had other sexual partners, but I hadn't. And we come into this relationship and we don't know anything about anything. You can read all the books you want, but it doesn't, I mean, back then, but it was not helpful for us in understanding the emotional connection to the sexual connection, that whole symbiotic thing. And so it was very confusing for both of us and very frustrating. So you just stop talking about it completely because it's just too hard. That's lack of a better way to say that. Sorry, I had to make a pun. And so the important thing is to start the conversation. And if you're not in a relationship, this is a really important conversation to have eventually if you are choosing to have that love experience again. This is a conversation that is probably it's just as valuable as the other conversations that you need to have, because what you bring into a relationship about sex does matter to the sexual relationship. And then how your hormones are, and do you have that oxytocin? Have you been building your oxytocin so that you can be in that kind of connected space? Has your partner been building their oxytocin so they could be in that space? Or have you been like Jamie and I were? I brought cortisol into the sexual relationship and he brought adrenaline, and both of those things block the oxytocin receptors. So it wasn't doing it. We didn't, yes, we had connection, but we didn't have the connection that we could have had we understood this information. So this just the open, honest conversation with one another about your desires, about how you feel safe in this space and how you feel secure, and making sure that you discuss what activities that each of you are comfortable with and what things that you maybe aren't comfortable with, as well as your own individual boundaries and expectations. And a part of this is also that offering of, for lack of a better way to say this, the consent of, hey, yes, I want you to know about me. I want to know about you sexually. And let's make sure that we are on the same page. Because sometimes you can be on the same page, but you're in a different book. You're like, wait a minute, we're talking about the same thing, but we have no idea what we're talking about. That's an important thing. And so talking about sex matters. It's hard. And again, you might need to find a mentor. Jamie and I are intimacy mentors, and you might need to find a mentor who you can have that kind of a conversation with to prep yourself to have the conversation with your partner, or with, in the future, a future partner. And so those are the 5 very important conversations. I mean, there's a lot of other conversations that are important, but these are, I would say, the top 5 conversations you need to be having inside of your relationship to keep your relationship on fire. And also, these are the conversations you need to be having with a new relationship that's turning into possibly person that you're going to be with for the rest of your lifetime. And so again, those conversations are, number 1, communicate from your heart. Remember, feeling language. Emotion is the chemical in your body. The feeling words are what you put on that emotion. So if I'm feeling my heart fluttering, then I'm probably feeling excited. And if I'm feeling this feeling like, not a good feeling, I'm probably feeling choked. So identifying these as such is really powerful for communicating what's going on in your heart. Second thing, talk about your relationship expectations. What do you expect inside of the relationship? How can you respect and honor your partner's feelings and have them respect and honor yours so that you both feel heard and understood? Number 3, create your coupleship goals. Get those goals out there, get them on paper, put them in a frame. You could do, if you love doing things like vision boards, create it like a vision board and frame that and put it in your room. And as your goals are met, change the goal, put another picture up there, put another something up there so that you know where you are headed. Because if you're not moving forward, you're moving backward. Remember that. That's really important. Number 4, establish your core values. If you haven't already, huge. 2 values. If you have more than 2, you can pretty much filter everything through everything. So your 2 core values are going to be really important, not only for yourself. And if you're not in a relationship, absolutely 100% find your 2 core values. If you are in a relationship, do it with both, have both of you do it and see what those 2 are and how they integrate together and how they are important to the relationship. And number 5 is to talk about sex, talk about that intimacy. And when you talk about sex, don't just talk about sex, talk about the emotional connection that leads to that physical connection. The emotional sexual loop is important to the conversation because they both matter. They're both important. I'm a responsive person sexually, which means that I can't just look at something, look at Jamie, whatever, and go, "Ooh, I'm really hot for him right now." That has happened, but it's not, I'm more often the responsive person. And Jamie can just look at me and be like, "Ooh, yeah," And so he's that more uh, of the word is just escaping me, but he's the one who's the pursuer. I'm the one who is the responder to that. And so what in your relationship, in your coupleship, who's the pursuer, who's the responder, and how do you want to make that so that you both feel valued, heard, loved, and that connection is super tight and complete. That a sexual emotional loop is constantly being fed, both sexually and emotionally, because that is what creates the best, most dynamic relationship. And so, what I want you guys to leave with today, or if you're watching the recording, is that these conversations are important conversations. And I mean, obviously, the sex conversation is a little bit with, if you're not in a coupleship, um, sharing stuff with your friends, that's whatever it is of the 5. If you aren't in a relationship, or you don't feel safe in your relationship to share these things, share with a trusted friend, and hopefully start to foster that conversation with your partner and go slow with it, because these are all some of these are maybe really familiar in a relationship, but some of them are new, and so going slow is really important. And remember, get curious instead of sitting in the questioning or the hurt. Get curious what's going on with your partner. Get curious what's going on with yourself. When you start getting curious and stop judging yourself and others, it changes everything. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. I appreciate that you have taken the time to watch this. And if you have any questions or thoughts or anything, please let me know. I'd love to have an interchange about what you thought, and particularly, well, I love what you thought, and particularly if you have any questions. And I hope that you all have an incredibly beautiful rest of your day, and that you take these things with you and know that you are worth it. You are worth having these conversations. You are worth being valued and loved and seen and heard, and you are valued and loved. Remember that as you go out throughout your day. Have a great day.